you can start. What's up guys, my name is Fernando and today we're gonna talk about those tiny pesky little bubbles that appear when you're trying to cast transparent epoxy resin.
So we're trying to cast the transparent part for one of our experiments, and these bubbles, they're kind of really hard to get rid of, and because the epoxy resin is very viscous, they take a really long time to rise, much longer than the cure time, and they kind of end up frozen inside the resin. And just for the record, we tried using a vacuum oven, and this is what we got. So this is an actual time lapse of 30 minutes of the vacuum oven operation, and you can see that the bubbles, they do rise. Forget about the mess; it makes a lot of foam, but the bubbles, they do rise very slowly. And now we're decompressing, and you can see that the bubbles, they're shrinking, but they didn't really leave. They kind of just shrunk. So the vacuum oven didn't really work for us, and it kind of exceeded the cure time of our resin, so the bubbles actually got frozen inside. So let's use our fluid dynamics knowledge to find out how the vacuum oven approach works and whether we can do any better. So say that we want to get rid of all the bubbles that are smaller than 20 microns diameter. Those are extremely tiny bubbles, and as long as we don't put them inside the mix to begin with, we should be fine. The bubbles rising on a viscous fluid, they obey the Stokes flow approximation. So we can calculate the terminal velocity of the bubble by using the following formula. Okay, so you can see here that the terminal velocity depends on the gravity acceleration and on the diameter of the bubble squared, which means that if we increase the diameter of the bubble, let's say twice as much, then we get actually 4 times the terminal velocity. Okay, so let's plug in the numbers here for just normal acceleration of gravity and the common viscosity that we find on these resins. And we see that the terminal velocity is 0.2 micrometers per second, which means that it will take about 11.5 hours for the bubble to cover 10 millimeters of height. And that's just not realistic. I mean, these resins, they cure in about 30 to 40 minutes, so it's just not going to work. Okay, so now let's try the vacuum oven. So we're decreasing the pressure by 10 times less than atmospheric, which means that our bubble is going to grow by 10 times as big. And because of his diameter squared dependence, then we get 24 micrometers per second, which is 100 times more terminal velocity, which means that our bubble rises 100 times faster, and it brings down our time to about, instead of 11 hours for 10 millimeters, we get about 7 minutes, which is decent. But unfortunately, if we want to make more than 10 millimeters, then it's still in about the time scales of the curing of the resin, because we still have to handle the resin and, mix it and everything. So it's still not exactly what we want, and we perhaps even have smaller bubbles than that. At least that's what the experiment seems to because it didn't work, right? So how can we generate an arbitrary amount of terminal velocity? So let's say, for example, if we use a centrifuge, we can design it such that we can increase the acceleration of gravity. And even though we're not increasing the diameter of the bubble, we can still increase the terminal velocity by quite a lot by just the sheer amount of gravity force. So if we do a centrifuge, we can increase G, even though the dependency in G is linear, we can still get a fairly decent terminal velocity of, in this case, 1,000 times more. And in that case, we would get about 40 seconds for, every 10 millimeters, which is very, very doable, even for like large syringes. And then we can use the syringes to actually pour our fully transparent and fully bubble-free resin into our model.
So in this experiment here, we have a quickly made centrifuge. And basically, we're going to have here 2 syringes. Okay, so this is one syringe. There's going to be another one here. And the syringes are mounted in just a hand drill. And we made this setup here because, we want to just take some, pictures, so we want it to be a little rigid. Of course, we want to make sure that, it's not going to blow up. So we have a little plexiglass here to keep us safe. and we have our phantom camera recording it. The interesting part about the setup is that we have an Arduino here connected to a Hall effect sensor, and the Hall effect sensor senses the position of a magnet that is attached to the hand drill. When the Hall effector sees the magnet, it will trigger, it will send a signal to the Arduino. The Arduino will read that signal, and it will parse that and send the trigger to the camera. And there's a frame sync here, and then we can take a picture every rotation at the same, roughly the same angle, and that allows us to make the movie that you saw, which allows us to see the progression of the centrifuge as for every cycle. So that's a very, very simple setup. I think it's very simple to build something like this at home, perhaps with a little bit better, and it's very effective at the removal of the bubbles.
Okay, so voiceover Fernando here. So you probably want to see how they look like. So let's look at the view from the high-speed camera. The syringe here is actually has a lot of bubbles, and we made this on purpose, so it looks a little bit more impressive. But you can see that the video clearly shows how the centrifuge works. This is actually accelerated, I think 2x, so it's not very too fast. But as you can see, it's just extremely effective. Okay, so this video here, we actually made an effort to make a lot of small bubbles. But now let's look at a more realistic scenario where the syringe has just some bubbles. So we're gonna accelerate it, and as you can see, it also works very well to remove the normal sized bubbles, let's say. And this is over the course of about 25 seconds, but we actually ran for 2 minutes just to be completely sure that we got rid of all of the bubbles. And as you can see here, this is completely clear, which is just amazing. I just love this process. Okay, so this is basically what I have to show, and if it helps you, I appreciate if you let me know, because that would be great. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next time. Bye.